Hi everybody, I'm Boji. I'm a lead developer in Etch, and today I want to teach you how to create a component in Etch that would be utilizing an external library. The idea for creating this video came from the issue that one of our customers, David Latzo, uh, enter at the Edge community. Shout out to David. He's like extremely active and for sure extremely like positive dude in our community. But he was trying to make his own implementation of Fancybox component, and he stumbled upon some issues. Yeah, how it that can happen to everybody, of course. And I was like wondering what exactly happened. He said that he has some issues on mobile, some worries about the accessibility of the library, etc. So I was like scanning through his post till I found that he used some JavaScript. Obviously, we are using JavaScript library. Some JavaScript must be involved, and uh, that was already an indication for me that something isn't exactly right here. So there's nothing bad with using AI to try to solve problems that we don't understand, obviously. But and like this snippet is obviously AI generated because no one ever written a script like this. Like no one ever. Yeah. AI had a task to accomplish. Like David for sure like prompted it to explain the environment, etc. And this is what it came up with. And well, something wasn't right here for me, like from sure. And I wasn't even like want to go deeply to this implementation of this code. I just know that it's not correct, and there is no way that library would um, persuade you to create this kind of a snippet. Yeah. So here's where I want to like start this tutorial is from the idea that if we want to create a component in Etch that is going to be using the external library, it's always very important and just extremely like best practice to first try to read through this library documentation. And I'm not saying here to go and learn it, word by word to acknowledge everything, but just to have a just to see what's there. Because while spending 5 minutes in the documentation for something that somebody spent so much time creating, it might end up being extremely beneficial for you. And I would highly recommend always doing that. So for that, like we will try to implement the Lightbox component from scratch in Edge. So like we have an empty Edge here, empty Edge page, and we're gonna see how far can we go trying to implement a dynamic component that is using the external API for interactivity. Yeah. So first thing, as I said, like must be just visiting the library, and of course I saw that David also did it, and but he was like focusing on a few of the examples, etc. But like we can see that the Lightbox is very nice. It has some like default fancy animations, etc. It looks extremely intuitive and basically user-friendly example of a nice JavaScript library. Yeah, and this is the introduction. The first thing we need to do is to like just see what can be done, what can be, how to install it. Yeah, like this is our computer, our Edge, and we need to install this plugin somehow over here. And first thing that for the 99% of the modern libraries, first proposition for them to install would be with the package manager. But we are in the PHP environment, not in the JavaScript server environment. So for us, not even JavaScript server environment, but JavaScript package manager environment, we don't have access to this inside of WordPress, so we cannot utilize those modules installed with the npm package. Yeah, but most of the vanilla JavaScript libraries going to have some alternatives, and this alternative for us is CDN. Yeah, for this tutorial, of course, we're gonna be using CDN. If you want to be more precise on the production, etc., you could go to those links later and just download them on your computer to just download the CSS file on the computer and upload them into your WordPress instance. For example, like this would prevent the European Union to think that you are a very bad person. So because you are using external computer code. But of course, for this tutorial, it's completely fine. And we just need to see what they want us to do. Yeah. So they're saying that it's required to have the style sheet inside of the head tag of our website. Yeah. Basically only on the websites that we're using it, but somewhere on the head, inside of the head of our component. So let's just copy it, and inside of Etch, we don't have yet the ability to add it to the head globally or to this page head, etc. Like we don't yet have a support for that. There's plenty like free snippets to add it, etc. Like I'm using WP Codebox, but there's other alternatives. But for now, let's just use. I'm just gonna use WP Codebox. Yeah. So like let's have fancy CSS. It's going to be HTML that lives inside of a WP head. We can add some comments. Fancybox CSS. Let's save it. Let's activate it. And we can just quickly check on our front end if it exists here somewhere. So inside of head, all right, Fancybox CSS. So we are good to go. The same thing going to needs to happen for the JavaScript, but they're saying that it's at the end of body element. Yeah, so we are copying it again. Go to our snippet manager, fancy script as in HTML. Let's add comments again to just be very clear where everything lives. Fancybox JS, and let's place it inside of the WP footer. Let's save it, and let's just be sure that it's actually over here inside of, I haven't initiated. All right, Fancybox.js, we're good to go. The first step of our installation is set up. It says manually, yeah, as I said, you can download it and have it manually as well, but we just used the CDN, and that's it. Yeah, it says that that's all prerequisites that were required for us to use the library. Next page in documentation is actual implementation of something we can do. All right, declarative and programmatic. We're going to be using declarative approach because we in Etch have access to DOM, so it's very easy for us to have it declared on the element level. That's great for us. All right, so let's create the element. The element requires to use the data Fancybox attribute and use ref or data source attribute to implement the final lightbox. As we can see over here, there's a example of how to use it. Let's just copy paste it, or let's just write it from scratch with data fancy box example. So over here inside of our container, let's create, as they said as at first, href. Let's just do whatever here for now, and has and this our anchor element has a data fancy box attribute. Yeah, and they showed us here that we have an image here and image here, and they're saying that this is an image, so I assume that this is the image that's gonna be inside of the lightbox, and this is the thumbnail, as they say. But of course, like for most use cases, it's gonna be the same picture, but we can investigate the idea of having them different later on. Of course, we need an image here, so let's add our image. For now, let's make it a little bit smaller just to see what's going on. We can also, I think it's text equals 1, for example. Yeah. So we have a nice placeholder from the placeholder API, and we're gonna use the exact same link here. All right. From what they said, it looks, I don't know why it's duplicated. It looks like that's all we needed from the example they provided. So we should be able to go to the front end, click on it. Wait, that's not what we wanted to happen. We wanted a lightbox. You know what? First thing, let's check console error. That's something external. All right, something ain't right. We wanted a lightbox and we have a broken website basically. Let's see what's going on here. Yes, we did exactly the same thing. This is going to be a gallery, all right. All right, there is a second step for us that we need to do to make it actually work. So the final step is to use Fancybox bind method to add a handler to the click event of the element that launches Fancybox. Paste this code anywhere on the page after adding the Fancybox JavaScript file. All right, I think we can copy it and maybe just throw it into our Etch JavaScript. Save, refresh. Something don't work. Something still ain't right. Why not? We have image. Yeah. We have image. And we have a with href attribute. What if we would change it actually to button? Data source. And save right now. All right. Right now it works. We have a working setup for now, for us right now. But I'm actually curious. I mean, they said it should work with the image and the image. So why it didn't work? It should work, yeah? So I'm actually kind of annoyed with that, let's say, because they promised that it's just gonna work with the approach that they proposed, yeah? So why don't you work? Yeah, you should work with data source. Will it work with data source? No, it won't work with data source as well. Data source, data, Fancybox. Ref. And it goes somewhere else. Well, I guess that's one part of annoyance of being a developer. Sometimes you stumble upon some bugs that you can clearly see that is a recommended way to do something in the documentation, but then you see that sometimes it might not work the way you would desire it to work. So what I think is actually happening here as well is that the this is a legit link. It should work as well. Well, I guess for now we're just gonna leave it as it is, and let's work with button, as button should work. Yeah, with it being data source. Basically, it is an alternative approach that they are recommending to use a data source here, but they also were recommending the for us to be using anchors, but they were a little bit buggy, so I don't like it so much. But we'll see. Maybe it's because it's an URL link and not something that we would, for example, have inside of our file structure in the node package environment. But for now, we'll be more than happy when we're just using their alternative approach that still works, that's still completely fine, and we see what we'll be able to do to accomplish with it. All right. So the second part of this was how can we componentize this basic implementation of JavaScript inside of our Etch instance. Yeah, because like right now we can of course bring up the second button. Let's make it just grid 4 so we see them clearly. And over here we have a second button. We can make it second, and we should have a working actually doesn't work. So we stumble upon some issues with that. If we're gonna name it gallery, and the first one gonna be named gallery. Yes, right now they are linked together. This is the part that we skipped, and we shouldn't have skipped it because right now we link those two together. Yeah. So the idea is that every gallery that we're creating apparently needs to have a certain name attached to it, so the library can recognize matching items to group them together. All right, we have a working Etch like Lightbox implementation. Right now, if we would duplicate this container and have it save, we would have all of those buttons inside of single gallery. If we would like to change it to a different one, we probably just need to add another name to the different set. And with that, yes, we have a different set here and a different set here. All right, perfect. This is a great place to start to make a component out of it. So we can firstly create some basic props to don't repeat ourselves where we don't need to. And later we can even investigate if it's possible for us to create a different interactive behaviors for the JavaScript with the usage of our props. So for that, of course, we need to remove all the buttons but one, and let's name it fancy light box item. All right, and we are creating component out of it. If we're gonna just save, and of course, the first obvious element that comes to mind where seeing our structure is that inside of button and inside of the image, we are using the exact same URL. So for that, of course, the easiest thing for us would be to create a media prop, call it image, and to target it over here, we can, let's use it over here, so it's used there by itself, and also over here, props image, perfect, we're saving, and on the front end, what happened? Props image, save. Where's the image? Maybe the default one didn't get populated, but we have over here. So let's actually populate the default value, because we want it to be here for us to see what's going on. Let's just quickly steal it from here. Image. I want to take the source of this image. Let's remove it and add it here as a default value, so we know what's going on. All right, so that's a very easy example. We just lost the necessity of creating two different props. We just have one that's populating both places. That's great. Yeah, that's perfect. Another obvious prop that we would need is the gallery name. Yeah, gallery name, we saw that requires a default value, so we're gonna call it the gallery, and we're gonna copy it, and we're gonna use it over here. Instead of gallery, we're going to use a curly brackets props gallery name. This way we can have multiple different galleries set up from the single source of truth, yeah, just with the usage of our props. For now, that's all we really need. We can close it, we can duplicate it, change the media, and we should have a working component of our Fancybox lightbox item. So this part was quite straightforward. We have a tutorial provided for us basically by the creators of this library. We are following it step by step, and we accomplished creating the environment that we want. We have a working library, etc. And right now we're gonna enter the world of JavaScript, where it's our job to create something that works exactly as we want it to work. Yeah. The documentation that we have here, with all those different options, the different guides, different APIs, is different sets of guidance, different sets of rules that most of the times is only required for some specific use cases where you would need this exact behavior. And I hope that like after finishing this tutorial, we're gonna have some idea of how you can implement some of them for your specific needs. Because when you come from like different environments like bricks with the breakdance or like whatever, like oxygen or element or whatever it is, and you're gonna see, let's say, a slide component that is available for you. Basically, the creators of the slide component spent a lot of times to create different graphical interfaces to give you access to all of those snippets that are available in the library that they were using to create this component. And I want to show you that for most cases, you just need, those 2 or 3 from the whole scope of the library that can give you. And most of the times it's going to be just easier and faster if you're just going to implement exactly what you want. And how can we make it dynamic? How can we make it reusable for your usage? Yeah. So we're gonna investigate some options. Yeah. There's plenty options. We can see on the right that there's like the whole set of different options. I'm not gonna be like choosing particular. I'm just gonna choose one that is very easy to demonstrate the dynamic behavior that we want to achieve. For this one, I think I'm gonna choose, there's a main class that seems to be a custom class name for the main container. This is something easy that we can use to showcase the difference of behavior between different components. So let's use it. For your use cases, you might be needing something completely different, but it doesn't matter exactly for our problem. So over here, let's say we have 2 Fancybox items. Let's create 2 more. I love images that I have on this instance. It makes literally no sense, but it is what it is. I also have this blue dog. All right. We have 4 different images inside of our lightbox, and let's call the 3rd and the 4th one another and another. So from what we know, what should happen is we should have 2 sets of galleries. Perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. They don't communicate with each other. And right now, let's figure out how we can create a different set of different main class. So inside of this, inside of our container, there's probably some container. There's probably some container over here. Yeah, Fancybox container. And from the options documentation, what I understand should happen is this custom class that I want to add should be added into the container of the lightbox. So for example, we can style it differently. We have some special behavior based on this class, etc. All right, so what I understand is I just need to add this main class, and it should my class here. If I save and I refresh it, if I go in again into this container, yes, we can see that main class here is represented here. The issue is that we are for sure that it's gonna be represented on each of those components, because that's the only rule that we ever given them. Yeah, it needs to be somehow dynamic. So how can we accomplish that with our with our components. Of course, with the use of some sort of the prop. Let's take this. It's annoying. All right, so we're creating it's gonna be a text prop. This text is gonna be our container class. Default value, we probably don't need a default value. It might be empty if we don't want to, but how can we put it here? So for now, there might be different paths for that in the future, but for now, the easiest and the most straightforward part would be to using the exactly thing that we were using over here. So data attributes. So let's call it data custom container class equals, of course, props that container class. What this should gives us, it should gives us access to every container class that we're gonna introduce in our JavaScript. Yeah, that kind of feels straightforward, but how can we actually access it? All right, this is the moment where we are starting to where we need to find this button, this fancy lightbox inside of the JavaScript. Yeah, we know that, for example, each of them has a data fancy box. This is for sure on every of the buttons. Yeah? So what we can simply do is, let's say, const fancy boxes equals document query selector all, because we want to find all of them, and what's the name? Data fancy box. All right, I hope it works, but I don't know. The best approach is that if you're not sure something, just try to console log it. Log fancy boxes. And we had a nice little auto-completion there from our code editor. We can check on the front end if something is happening. All right, there is. We have a node list of 4 buttons. Perfect. This is what we wanted to accomplish for now. Now we want to do something with those fancy buttons. Yeah. Actually, probably for every of those fancy buttons, we're going to try to run this fancy box. But how to do that? To do so, we would need to, let's remove it, loop through all of those. You know how loops works inside of Svelte. Similar to that, of course, there must be some way to do that as well inside of the JavaScript. So we have a fancy boxes, yeah, and there's like 4 each, for example. For each of those fancy boxes, we will extract the fancy box, a single one of them, and then we're going to do something with it. This is a syntax in JavaScript. If you are not familiar with that, I highly recommend to learn some JavaScript. But there's no other way to learn this syntaxes than just typing some JavaScripts and suddenly it's stuck in your head. Yeah. So remember how previously we logged the list of the nodes. If right now we're gonna console log a single fancy box from over here, we're logging it over here. On the front end, we should have 4 separate logs, not a single list, but for first, for second, for fourth, and for fourth. Perfect. With that, maybe we can do something else. Let's say we can find the specific data sources, data sets from those elements that we can use for something else. To do that, we can extract them from those data sets inside of JavaScript. We are doing it with, let's say, ID. This is going to be our data fancy box, as it's kind of ID of this gallery, of this fancy box. Yeah. So how we're doing it is we're taking this fancy box that we have, and then we are reaching an access to something called dataset. Dataset represents the access to attribute named started with data. This is like a special handler in JavaScript. Regular we can use get attribute, and here you can throw whatever, yeah, like ID, class, or even this again. But there is also a special handler for dataset called dataset, and here we can just use the, for example, fancy box, and of course, how we did so many times before, ID, right? And over here, yes, we have two sets of gallery and two sets of another. That's a great success because it's the first time that we separate those two somehow, to some degree. And this is what we wanted. Yeah. All right. Second part is going to be to initiate the fancy boxes as we did previously, but with the context of those two separated galleries. Right now, we are running the same fancy box for all of them. Yeah, so we are initiating the same exactly structure of Fancybox, the instance of Fancybox for all of them. We want to separate them. We can see that we were using a data. Let me maybe zoom in a little bit on the JavaScript part so you have better access here. We were so we need to split those together. Previously, we were using this selector to bind all possible items with this selector to this Fancybox instance. But what we want to do is to actually split them. We have access to ID. ID is a part of this selector that comes here. So ID. That is dynamic. All right, so first thing that we see that it's probably should be inside here, yeah, because we want to have access to ID, so we need to be inside of this. All right, right now, if we're gonna save it and go on the front end, we have some syntax error. This is because inside of JavaScript to have access to strings that are dynamic, we need to create some special handling for that. In JavaScript, we have backticks that, first of all, allows us to write regular asterisks inside of the string, and the second part is that we right now have some access to dynamic data. To do so, the part that should be referred to some variable needs to be wrapped like this. All right, and right now it composes into the dynamic selectors, and those two should run two different separate sets of those rules that we have here. So right now, if we're gonna go into the front end, the behavior is still the same, and also the class that we wanted to insert here should also be the same, my class here. So right now we're reaching the fun part of dynamic values from props inside of the JavaScript. we're basically gonna utilize the data sets again. So it's gonna be it's not gonna be ID here, but it's going to be our container class. And the container class is Fancybox dataset dot container class. You can see that here we're using dashes, here we're using camel cases. This is because in JavaScript you cannot just throw dashes everywhere because dash is a minus and we don't want to extract class from container. We want to, so like something like this wouldn't work in JavaScript. This is why they converted those to camel cases. All right, and right now we have access to it, and assumingly we should be able to just throw this here instead. Right now we're gonna save and go back into the into our container. Let's target it. Container. All right, there is no class here. Why is that? It might be because we haven't defined them over here. So first class, and right now there's gonna be something that you might need to understand in the second, is that you can see that we are defining them on each of those instances, and that's kind of not what we want to do, but we needed to start it somewhere. But over here, if we're gonna check it, here's we have second class, and if we're gonna open the first one and check it, here's we have a first class. So we made a dynamic JavaScript based of the props value inside of Etch. And this is basic idea of how powerful it can be later. In this example, I'm gonna show you also one Boolean property that we can use to achieve something similar. So let's do that first before I'm gonna explain why in this particular example we need to create an environment where we had those set in both cases. We actually don't need to have them set in both cases. We just need to have them set in the last case scenario for now. So let's do that. So we are refreshing, and we can see that on the container we still have the first class, even though it's not defined of this one, but on the last one of the type it is defined. This is why this is happening, because if we're going to open our component, we see, because of our console log ID here, that it runs twice. Yeah, we have access to each of those. We run this, so like we are initiating the Fancybox for every match, and we have 2 matches. And in JavaScript, the second one will override the first one, basically, if it's possible. Yeah, if it's for example a variable that you're trying to declare the second time, it's just gonna be an error. But with that in mind, it's a function, so it runs the function and then it runs the same exact function again. The only difference is that on this first instance of the component over here, the container class was empty, and on the second one it wasn't empty. So it's happy and it takes the one that has a value. If the empty one would be the last, the empty one would be the value, because it's get overwritten with the last hit. It's of course possible to prevent the extra hits completely, but you still need to define it if you want to define, for example, a container class on the first, on the last one. But I'm not sure if I'm gonna be creating the fix for it, or maybe I'll show you how to use like AI efficiently for that, so it's easy for you. We'll see. We'll see. Oh, I'm gonna close my yellow light OBS preset because I was annoyed how yellow it is. All right, so this was an example of the text prop, and let's have one more example of the boolean prop. So we're going to have David specifically said that it would be awesome if there would be advanced controls, zoom, rotate, flip, or something like that. So for that, we for sure need to re-enter documentation, see what that's even mean. Yeah, like what are those settings, where they lives, etc. We can see the usage or maybe introduction, because there is something like transformation controls. Yeah, they have those fancy transformation controls. Where can they be? Those are hipster frameworks, so for sure not here. Guides, images, HTML, video, Google Maps, toolbar. I'm pretending I have read that before, so I know it was toolbar. But toolbar sounds like it might be like, it's for sure not any of those, and probably not any of those. So like toolbar was one guide that kind of made intuitive sense. But yet again, we are in the scenario where we have been introduced to some code that they want us to use. And they're saying there's like a carousel, toolbar. I don't know what that means, but I will take it. We can see this is something that we already are familiar with. We did that. Yeah, we have Fancybox bind. We did exactly this. Yes, over here we have Fancybox bind, and we binded this to our controls. So what we want to do is to just take what they want us to take, copy paste it, and throw it to our options. We already have one option, so it's an object in JavaScript. So second key of that would be used with, second property would be separated with a comma, and I'm just pasting it. That's all I did. Let's see if I would. I will go away. I saved, I refreshed, and there they are. I'm not exactly interested what are the specific components of this. If for your particular implementation you just want to flip Y, not flip X, of course you can do it. You see what you need to do. You just removing parts, adding parts. Use any transformation button provided by the Panzoom component. What does it mean? There's a button. Yeah, there's a button here that you can click to see what it means. That's the over here. Yeah, all of the possible controls for it. It literally just moved me to the precise place in some different part of the plugin. Where I don't care what it does. I don't care how it like appeared there. I just have a list, so I know I can use it. That's how libraries works. Yeah, it's just a copy pasting roller coasters. That's all it is. But it works, yeah. All right, so let's just have some fun with some extra JavaScript. So we want to have access to those controls dynamically. Some lightboxes might have them, some lightboxes might not have them. To do that, we created this component property. Let's call them toolbar, and we're gonna copy it, and we're going to create another data source of that's even worse. Data toolbar equals props toolbar. And back in our JavaScript, we can add another one of data sets matches. So we're gonna call it show toolbar, or just like toolbar. Toolbar equals Fancybox dataset toolbar, because this is how we called it. And right now we want to populate this toolbar with those properties, or maybe even we want to populate the whole carousel with the toolbar. So we won't be choosing which properties are displayed, but if the whole toolbar is displayed. Yeah, this is how I understand it here, but I think that's correct. To do that, we need to dynamically show this object over here. Where does it stand? It's here. Yeah, we want to create this object over here, or let's say this object. No extra data. To do that, we can utilize the value of this toolbar. Yeah, this toolbar, if we're gonna console log it, toolbar, and let's exit it for now. And let's say our second one will be false and the first one is true. We can save it. And on the front end, we can see it's true, 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 false. I know, but this one's gonna be executed anyway, so the difference matter here. But I want to ask you to make a exact attention here, because you can see that true and gallery are displayed the same way. What it means is the true here is not actually a Boolean value. It's actually just a string. It's because when we check the implementation, we can see that it's just data toolbar true. This is all it is. So we need to implement some sort of solution to convert this value of true to being an actual value that we would be able to utilize inside of the JavaScript, because the string is always truthy. It doesn't matter if it says true or false. If it exists as a string and we are checking the truthiness of this value, it's always gonna return a truthy value. What I mean by that is that if we would have here another console log of, let's go full screen for you. I can even console if toolbar console log true or true as a Boolean value, else console log false. And if I'm gonna save and go back to the front end and just see here, we have 4 truths, even though on the one of those we defined it as false. Yeah. So what can we do about it? Well, we need to check if it's a true string. So all we need to do here to make this console log work correctly is to have equals true. Right now we're checking it for the exact value of string true. And this should allow us to differentiate them and to have an actual Boolean values of true and false. Yeah, that's the difference. And those are correct way that we can implement this change. So what we did here, we can do inside of the short hit, we can create a template literate that we can just create a singular Boolean value over here. For that, we're gonna change it to show toolbar, and we're going to inline this if statement over here. So we have a Fancybox that as a toolbar equals true, and if this is true, then there's a special syntax of question mark, true, or else false. And right now, if we're going to just console log this show toolbar Boolean value, if we're going to go into our, we have false, true, true, true. So exactly what we wanted. Perfect. So right now we're going to implement the similar short approach to creating conditional display for this carousel object. So all we're going to do is to create a const toolbar carousel object equals if show toolbar. I want to use this object, so question mark this object, and in the end of this I want to alternatively use an empty one. And right now I should be able to erase this object with just our carousel object that is dynamically set based on the value of the show toolbar Boolean prop inside of Etch. So if I'm gonna go back to the front end, I have my first carousel that has a toolbar set to true, and the second one that has a set that has it set to false does not. But wait, the first item of the second gallery has it set to true. No, as I said, the last executable part of this carousel going to be executed. That's the difference. Right, with this condescending comment at the end, I think this is the best, great part where we can finish this tutorial. I hope that you're gonna get something from it. I hope that I taught you some of the ideas. As I said, okay, maybe we can do this. Maybe I can teach, like, we had this annoyance that it was running twice, but no, I think it's gonna be too complicated and too overly. I would need to introduce another layer of JavaScript abstractions, like another layer of JavaScript variables, basically, or primitives, yeah, because I would need to use set or map to create the functionality of separating those two only hit once. So no, I'm not gonna be doing this for you today. Sorry. Maybe next time. Yeah, maybe next time. So for today, that is all. We have a working fancy Lightbox item component. Of course, the JSON to this component is not going to be shared because I want to urge you to learn and to urge you to actually go through this tutorial and create it for yourself, because the idea of this tutorial is not to use this exactly component that I just designed, is to be able to enhance it, be able to use this component and use different options that you would need for specific problem. Yeah, we can use conditions in if to have a different item for image or thumbnail, and with default to using image for both, etc. There's an opportunity to create a model out of it with the slot inside of the Etch. This is also possible with this library. This is amazing library and a huge opportunity to actually go in, dig. I would highly recommend for you to try to create a component in Etch that would be utilizing the HTML inside of it, because it is possible. I would recommend to create a like synced light boxes or something. I don't know. Like there's different options that are for sure possible to do, and just like have fun with it. Yeah. See ya.